With many things I often think of dinosaurs, specifically Jeff Goldblum's ominous scolding in Jurassic Park. Your scientists were so preoccupied with whether or not they could, they didn't stop to think if they should. In the business world, our focus is all in on AI, frantically running that sprint that we were talking about earlier. We've adopted that tech bros mentality of moving fast and breaking things. Well, guess what? When things crash and we're going to need an adult in the room to help clean things up, who are they going to call? Once again, HR to the rescue.
Business leaders know the future is already here. The economy is shifting. Non-humans are entering the workforce. Nothing feels certain. SHRM understands those evolving challenges, both in the workplace and the wider world. In this podcast, we'll bring together authors, researchers, executives, and non-traditional experts to help you take on the challenges others haven't yet considered. Because you don't need to be a futurist, you need actionable insights now. You need to be a Tomorrowist. I'm Jerry Wan. Welcome to Tomorrowist, where we explore the trends shaping the future of work. This week, we're digging up into a less talked about consequence of the AI boom. What happens when organizations move fast on automation and efficiency, but overlook the human systems that actually make the work sustainable? Today, the question isn't just what AI can do, it's what organizations should be prioritizing alongside it. Here to help us unpack the strategic trade-offs and future implications of AI-driven work is Kenny Pyle, HR Technology Lead Analyst at SHRM. Kenny, welcome to Tomorrowist.
Thanks, Joey. It's great to be here.
I'm really excited for this because I think, this question of, just because we can, should we, or the technology is there. And so we're going to dig into sort of the taking a step back, right? Because I think a lot of the conversations around what should we do and what's everybody else doing. And then this sort of fundamental question of, should we be doing it in the first place in lieu of what, alongside what? And so really excited for this very important conversation. We're seeing unprecedented AI spending and adoption across organizations. SHRM's own 2026 CEO Priorities and Perspectives report revealed that 40% of CEOs identified AI adoption as one of their top 3 priorities this year. Amid real innovation, there's a lot of hype and competitive pressure. We get that. But when you look at today's technology investments in people and operations, where do you see that tension showing up more clearly?
Well, I guess you can look broadly, say there's a real tension in just how sustainable this current industry and bubbly valuations actually are. But when we do get into the individual organizational level, and if it falls too far, then you can go ahead and join the ranks of everyone who is updating their resume with AI now. So we got bets being made and announcements being stated in the most public and highest places. And we still have this very high level of uncertainty about what the actual scale of efficiencies are going to be for AI and what it's going to bring, or what the smart term bets actually are. The rest of the organization is then left scrambling and trying to build a ship that their CEO is boldly sailing into the future. There's that pressure to deliver. Obviously, didn't start with just a huge pressure because we knew this was going to take a little while back in the sober days of what could be possible. But I feel like we're starting to get closer. Every day an earnings call that passes, the pressure builds. And if AI solutions aren't then yielding the promised results, which broadly they're not really, then the pressure further intensifies. And I'm getting a sense that 2026 could be the year when that patience finally worse then.
AI is the buzzword and has been for a while, but we've seen other renditions of this, right? This sort of FOMO. You must say this during your earnings call, or you must tell everybody that you're doing this. Otherwise, you're going to have the public perception and the internal perception, even with your own customers and employees, that you're not doing enough, that you're not on the front edge of technology or innovation. And so I think it's a great conversation to have. Just a little while ago, it was all about blockchain. And before that, it was something else. And so we go through these phases. And with every new trend or every new technology advancement, it's always but this is the real one, right? And so we get into this sort of, how much do you invest in it? And it is really, at the end of the day, to use a very simple phrase that we're all familiar with, it's this battle against FOMO. How much do you do it? What are the risks of not doing anything versus what are the risks of, or the risk and rewards, particularly for executives, directing spending and investments on where do you win? Is status quo going to keep your own job safer and the organization advancing, or not? And I think that is a fundamental question that I think many people are asking themselves. We're recording this in the middle of February, and we saw a lot of AI ads. Of course, those are geared towards consumers, but during the Super Bowl, a significant chunk of ad spend was on getting people comfortable with AI, and that also means that at work, and in institutions, that's going to be as well. Maybe you have a crystal ball that I don't have, Kenny. But and 5 years seems like forever, because 5 years ago was forever. But if we were to look ahead at 5 years, which assumptions about AI automation and its impact made by organizations and its leaders do you believe are most likely to fall apart and will say, well, that didn't work out?
Well, Jerry, I think it begins with that first assumption, what AI would do for us. We let the tech bros tell us about how amazing their AI was and how it was going to take over vast parts of our organizations. AI was going to be able to take over and efficiently replace things. We were talking about how much could be saved, how much could be reduced. But think about the contrast. When Steve Jobs was championing the PC revolution back in 1980, he led with the bicycle for the mind metaphor. It was only additive. How much are we going to be able to do? How much more are we going to be able to achieve? So I think at 5 years, we're going to look back and we're going to see what I would call a negative approach to AI's launch. And I'm going to say it's not just a mistake, but an absolute disaster. It started people and employees in all of society on the defensive. Now, we probably need to give a shout out to Skynet because that didn't help at all. But we really just started with the absolute wrong mindset. It moved people away from being the center of plans. And so we replaced it with AI. And how can people maximize AI's impact? It's given us rash layoffs and AI washing, which I love that term. It's given us poor org designs and talent decisions that will linger for years. I mean, don't get me wrong, AI is absolutely amazing and is going to transform the world. But we could not have started thinking about it in a worse way.
And so when we think about investing in AI, the question is, do we add to the investment budget, or are we taking something away from something else that we would have or that we already were, because we believe that AI will help us save money or to make more money or to be efficient in some way, shape, or form? And so if leaders weren't investing so heavily in AI right now, what other foundational capabilities of workforce investments and other things internally should they be prioritizing? And another way to put it, again, looking at this crystal ball 5 years from now that you and I don't have, but we're going to do our best to try to see what that might look like. When people look back, what do you think that they would have wished that they would have invested in otherwise, and not the AI that we're doing today?
Well, I think you're exactly right. What's the opportunity costs of being so laser focused on AI at this stage? It's almost like AI entered the discussion and everything else became irrelevant. I mean, maybe not irrelevant, but definitely secondary. AI, obviously, it deserves our immediate attention. It deserves and it continues to deserve. But I think with this massive AI overhaul that we are all invested in, maybe, just maybe, could we be neglecting something? Well, we asked HR leaders how they would, what they thought about this, how they would allocate personal L&D funds to upskilling. And we gave them a lot of options. 30% said more leadership development, 25% said AI upskilling, 17% went to human-focused skills, soft skills, whatever we want to call them now, and the rest were distributed amongst the other areas. Well, we then asked a follow-up question. We said, this time excluding AI, if that was not an option, how would you allocate those funds? And it actually ended up being pretty evenly distributed across the other areas. They all grew about 20%, give or take, except for one area that increased by 250%. It's what we called craft practice, or really the core of what you do. Now, there are lots of ways you can interpret that data, but to me, it's screaming that if we force people to just for a second take AI out of the discussion, there's a real desire to get back to the basics. There's this acknowledgement that we're probably neglecting things that we weren't 3 years ago. We want to get back to the core of what we do and get better at doing that. I think it's impressive.
That's really fascinating because I think, this conversation around AI is always this debate between, is it additive or is it going to replace? And if it's the latter, what does it replace? Right. And I think and when we talk about AI, I think people are thinking about organizational or institutional use cases, but I think about the ways that I use it, right? And the way that our audience probably uses it, whether it is to help craft emails or to edit things or to get through a writer's block. And and organizations are behaving in same ways because we're just a collection of human beings in terms of, are we looking at these tools to completely replace us? No. But how much of our creative thinking or what we're known for, in essence, the tactical things? And so this is really fascinating. And that data is really, really, because you should really focus on what you're known for or what your organization is core, their business function is. What current technologies or operational decisions around people and processes do you think leaders are moving on too fast from? And maybe it's because AI is taking attention and money away. And what do you expect organizations will be forced to do later to undo or fix it? You touched upon it a little bit, this core practice of the craft. But if we can give a soft warning signal, perhaps to say, don't not invest in this or don't take away too much budget from this particular bucket of processes and investments.
Joey, with many things I often think of dinosaurs, specifically Jeff Goldblum's ominous scolding in Jurassic Park. Your scientists were so preoccupied with whether or not they could, they didn't stop to think if they should. In the business world, our focus is all in on AI, frantically running that sprint that we were talking about earlier. We've adopted that tech bros mentality of moving fast and breaking things. Well, guess what? When things crash and we're going to need an adult in the room to help clean things up, who are they going to call? Once again, HR to the rescue. Again, I go back to moving from that human-centric to an AI-enabling mindset. The exact nature and damage are going to depend on how much was built around that poor mindset, but it's going to be vast. I was actually talking to a HR technology vendor at a conference a few months ago and was asked, what's HR's top priority going to be over the next 5 years? And I told him in a less PG version than I'll share today that it would be undoing all the awful decisions about people that have been and are currently being made when it comes to AI. I'm not sure if my prediction or colorful language raised more eyebrows in that group, but I boldly stand by both.
As SHRM's own survey findings suggest, some areas of talent development are being overlooked as organizations prioritize AI and tech first strategies. I think we've covered that, and I hope this is not giving some of our audience members too much of a self-reflectionary mode of, hey, am I, are they talking about me in a sense? How do you see this shaping future leadership pipelines? Are we going to prioritize and elevate people who are really AI proficient? There's a lot of conversations around even in college and early career folks to make sure that AI. Does AI knowledge supersede tactical or functional or industry knowledge as we see this wave of perhaps overinvestment into all things that have AI or AI enablement built into the title?
Yeah, that's a great question. And how we get there, I'm not exactly certain, but I know that in a few years, we're just not going to be talking about AI as much because it is just going to be how things are done. And so it's just going to be knowledge. It's going to be processes that we've been doing for a few years now. So how we get there, I'm not as concerned with. My bigger concern is the impacts that have actually already occurred because of AI. Several tech forward companies have used AI efficiencies to help make managing easier, require less effort, take some of that administrative task away. And instead of increasing maybe the resources and things that would help them become better managers with that extra time, they've decided they're going to go with the quantity route, and they laid off some managers, and they said, you should just take on maybe twice as many direct reports. That does a whole lot of things here. So you're telling people that they're now just a bit more of that much more of a cog in a machine. They're not going to spend as much time with you, that you're one of 15 reports that they have, when 15 is a very real number that lots of people are doing now. In addition to that, there's some very simple economics. They're going to cause huge problems down the line. We've reduced this supply of future executives. What that is doing is putting even more pressure on an already really painful point of executive recruiting. How do we build that executive bench? How do we build that executive pipeline? You're killing off a nice slice of people who would have gained those experiences that would have made them those better candidates. Now, look, I'm not saying that you need to keep your pipelines open and have fewer direct reports and be maybe a little bit less efficient, so you can help the world, the managerial world, have more candidates. It's a bit of that prisoner's dilemma there. If you do that, you're just going to have a big sign, hey, they have great people, go poach them. What I'm just saying is that given the opportunity to focus on improving that quality or going for efficiency, we've gone straight to efficiency. Yeah. Not everyone, but some of these tech-forward organizations have. And so we're having a whole percentage of those leaders that just aren't going to have the skills required when they're ready to assume those highest level roles.
Your big idea might come from a single conversation. Connect with other leaders at SHRM 26 and see what sparks. Learn more at shrm.org/SHRM 26.
Let's talk about the other end of this, the career spectrum, and we've alluded to it a little bit earlier in this conversation. Is what about the younger folks, right? Because I think the messaging is, there's a ton of debate on the usage of AI in the academic space, and I have young kids, how much are they going to use it? It's being painted as this sort of, again, an additive tool to help you think faster, better. Or young folks, younger career folks earlier, and students, being coached, taught, rewarded to learn actual skills. Let's take a very tactical, role like accounting, right? Are they actually learning it, or are they being taught how to use AI to do it? And at what point would they actually need to know how to do it? What are your thoughts around the message that we're sending to younger folks in our workforce pipeline, people who are studying right now to enter the workforce, as we see disruptions change at the top, as we mentioned, around the elimination or perhaps the decrease or reorganization of tools or people. In the same breath, I want to mention that we've seen a significant number of reorgs and layoffs over the last few years. Using AI as one of the reasons why, in the sake of efficiency. What can we tell, whether it's reassuring, Kenny, or it's maybe a Jurassic Park style warning, as we talked about earlier? What do we want to say to the younger folks who are looking at this, saying, "What do I do? This was not. Things are changing so quickly. This was not what I thought I'd be walking into as a career."
Yeah, that's another great question. Like this is a generation of young workers who are emerging, who, as students, were pioneering making AI work for them and doing so without a template. They were being held to the same standards as everyone, but they had this new tool that, whatever side of that blurry boundary of legality they were getting into, it was used heavily in some cases. So you were finding ways that without that template, without that training that you sit through on how to become an efficient AI user, they just naturally did it. So you have a generation of really AI native potential employees. And there's a lot of evidence out there that there's a pretty decent gap in the unemployment of those younger people. That's due to the slowing job market for sure, but then also a lot of uncertainty in plans. You have companies who don't necessarily know exactly what they're going to do. So maybe let's just hold off on making those hires. You have some who are just saying entry-level roles are irrelevant because all of the stuff that our entry-level employees have done, AI is not doing. So it's taking them over. So we're just going to cut them out. And then you have those images of the new grads like reaching up and trying to reach that ladder, and there's no rung for them. I mean, it's a huge mess, but I think we're just really thinking about this the wrong way. There's always going to be entry level roles. The problem isn't them, the problem is us. We're not rethinking not just those entry level roles. We're not thinking through all of the roles that would be that career path for them. If we are just focused on like for like, then it's an obvious, well, you just cut this.
Hmm.
But if instead you take that additive approach and you say, wow, how much more could we do here? And wouldn't it be great for my department that maybe is struggling a little bit to really embrace AI to have an absolute champion amongst their midst who could show folks, who could create new processes, who could take your organization to the next level? So in that dilemma that some people are facing of how do I get up to speed, some ways we're cutting off some of the most valuable employees that we could bring into that organization. Now, to do this, we would have to really rethink a lot of things. We're going to have to rethink what is that entry level role? What are those responsibilities? What type of support is required to be an entry level employee? If we do that and we can create that opening, that pipeline, that increased responsibility and increased support that will be required, I think there is an amazing opportunity for young workers, but it's on us. We haven't got there yet.
I love the optimism, Kenny, and I think it certainly is necessary, right? Because I think, we're talking about, large organizations, obviously, in our audience, but we see a parallel in the startup space, right? Anytime there's a new idea, the funding and the wave of ideas and new, ventures and projects all go into that space. And it creates this vacuum in a sense of other non-AI related ideas not being invested in, not being ventured into, solving the problems that are just as worthy in terms of solving and just as important to solve. And so, I wish all of our young folks the best. It's not, I think as you mentioned earlier, the robots and Skynet taking over everything, not anytime soon. We've all used AI. It's good. There's, we're far away from it actually replacing us. But it does, I think, give us a lot of pause in terms of what we want to do, what we want to be known for, what problems we want to solve. And ultimately, as we started the conversation with Kenny, it is, should we be solving that problem, or what problem do I want to solve, and not just focused on how can I solve this particular problem best. As we close our conversation, I want to talk to you about sort of what's next in HR tech. Obviously, we have a lot of audience members and folks in the SHRM space that are focused on the intersection of the HR industry and then technology. And so as AI becomes more embedded across HR systems and becomes infused in everything that we do, how do you see employee experience changing in terms of how people interact with technology at work? We have the old, I'm going to walk over to the HR team's office, knock on the door, and have a conversation. I'm going to physically look up a manual or a handbook to get my answers. A lot of those things aren't happening anymore. And so how does that change how employees and team members interact with the company as a first line experience?
Yeah, technology's changed a lot of ways that people interact with HR because they now click into a system to get an answer or do something instead of going and having that face-to-face conversation that may have been done before. When it comes to how AI is going to continue that transformation, I'm going to go with completely transform the way that we even think about interacting with HR technology, with HR, and completely up into the industry in the process. So obviously this isn't happening immediately, but I think that AI is going to become the new UI or user experience. So right now, if an employee needs something from HR tech, they're going to sit down, go into their internal system, find the right HR system that they need to use, go into it and either extract some information from it or make a change or put some information into it. And that's the way it's just worked. We would pivot to it. We adapt to the system. And that's because obviously that's the only way that would work. Tech companies have spent who knows how much money on UX research to try to do their best, but it still isn't great. They just really can't make a system kind of reflect to us and how we would go through something. in our purest form. So AI comes along, and all of a sudden, it's an interpreter, a navigator, and connective tissue for that employee.
Mm.
AI's ability to communicate through natural language is going to allow us to look for information in a way that's natural to us, interpret that, and put that into HR technology speak, and then go and find that information or where we need to change that across all of the various HR systems. And that's systems, not just a system. We're going to be able to go and, with a simple request in a chat format, be able to access and change and update everything we need through that AI interface. It's going to finally make the computer, the system, pivot to us. So, we're not there yet for a variety of reasons, but this is eventually going to force HR technology vendors to adapt.
Mhm.
They're going to probably be stop focus as much on the front end and work on making their back end more accessible and make sure integrations are clean. This is probably going to give a natural advantage to those companies who have been spending more time on their back end instead of that front end user interface, which all of our members have told us how much they just love those non-intuitive systems. Those are actually going to, in a flip, maybe become their best systems to be using.
Mm.
Quite the reversal. So we'll see how this evolves, but the fact that AI can pivot for us and adapt to systems instead of us having to do that adapting is absolutely going to change the way things are going forward.
And what are your thoughts on, I think, everything that you're saying makes sense, right? We want to make sure that it's easy, it's more user friendly. There's information that is, going to be more easily accessible, more easily to update. But AI isn't going to live in a silo with a particular department, HR in this example. But as it gets integrated through the organization, how do we think about sometimes the sensitivity of information, the cross sharing? We're talking about, eventually the end state being one AI tool that can, cross functionally be the answer or the go-to point. What are your thoughts there in terms of, what things leaders should be mindful of? Again, I think there's this, urge or pressure to throw everything against AI and saying, hey, take it all and then give us what you've got. What are some thoughts or, things that leaders should be mindful of before they overcommit?
So the first thing I would do for HR leaders is just ask how you're approaching this. Do you have a market mindset? And naturally, not that market mindset. I'm talking about the kind where you go to get a certain kind of food. Your butcher, your baker, produce stand, your deli. Are you set up so that you can integrate all of those into a supermarket
Mm.
where they are working together in a cohesive one-stop location? Or is it going to make more sense to just tear it down and build up a new superstore that's going to have everything purpose built from the ground up in one place? You need to think about that. You're going to need to work with your IT department on this. You're going to need to think through and understand what the enterprise strategy is when it comes to some type of a data lake layer, whatever it is, that data accessibility across the
Mm.
whole organization. What are those plans? Because you're now squarely plugged into that. You might lose your HR tech vendor and have that enterprise vendor that you use instead. And it might actually end up being a great thing. What I would be cautious about, and the most important thing from this, you have to stand up and make sure that your data assets are being taken seriously. It is very easy for people to think of like a strategy document or maybe executive communications or your M&A data, that is the most critical information to safeguard. But that's nothing compared to all of the PII that you have sitting around. You have employee data, general data, pay data, performance data, HIPAA information. Is nothing but PII. And it's a minefield. So if you're not safeguarding that, if you're not making sure that that is protected and access limited and the most protection provided for that data, bringing everything together
Mm.
in kind of a pan enterprise AI suite could be a real, real challenge. I mean, it's this data, ironically, is what HR works with every day to do its job is the minefield that companies need to be careful of.
We've talked a lot about AI investments, cautionary tales, and things that both leaders and early career folks should be mindful of, be slightly concerned about, or even be excited about, Kenny. And you've given us a lot of takeaways in terms of things to think about and things to be mindful of. If we were to distill our conversation, and I know you just gave us the one thing to remember, but as
This is
we
the most important thing.
but as we typically end our shows here on Tomorrowist, I ask you to leave our audience with the one thing that our leaders can do today to help them make smarter HR technology decisions for tomorrow.
Yeah, absolutely. So today, what you can start doing is change the narrative in your organization when it comes to HR technology. Who's working for who here? Any technology adoption is going to require us to learn new things and modify our behavior, but technology needs to be seen for what it really is. No, I'm the HR technology guy here, but I'm going to say it is a means to an end. It's not a strategy in and of itself. Look for those amplifying bicycles. When you think of technology, look for where you're going to be able to amplify and get more out of your workforce. Focus discussions on how that technology will better amplify this talent, the minds of your employees, and watch how your technology roadmap ends up paving itself from there.
Wonderful. This conversation has been extremely insightful, and it actually leaves me with more questions than answers, which I think is a good thing. That's what we want people to think about as they make decisions and as they even process and evaluate the decisions that they've made already or are in the process of making. And so Kenny Pyle, Lead HR Technology Analyst at SHRM, thank you so much for joining us. That's it for this week's episode. If this conversation resonated with you, check the show notes for resources on navigating AI adoption and the long-term trade-offs leaders need to be thinking about now. See you next time on Tomorrowist. If you enjoyed today's conversation, please subscribe to Tomorrowist wherever you get your podcast. We also publish a weekly newsletter with in-depth articles and the latest SHRM research to help keep you in the know about the trends shaping the future of work. You can subscribe and find all of our episodes on our website at shrm.org/Tomorrowist. Thanks for listening. And remember, the workplace is changing rapidly. You don't have to be a futurist, be a Tomorrowist.
SHRM.